opening slide. This presentation is a reflection on year 2 of the program and to contribute to our annual workshop, which this year will of course have to be virtual. So it's possible that some of you don't know what the MECS program is. It's UK aid funded. It started in about October 2018, will finish in September 23, and is a £40 million program. The core premise was that SDG 7 was failing in terms of responding to people's cooking needs, and that improved cook stoves there were a number of reports that said improved cook stoves were not keeping up with population growth and not making a fundamental health difference. So there were a whole load of international organizations that called for a different strategy, and an alternative strategy. So since about 2012, some researchers in the UK had been looking at how solar PV prices were coming down, how battery energy storage prices were coming down, and considered that by 2020 it might be possible to create a solar home system that could also cook. And that led into discussions creating the program after some initial sort of background research. I was a little bit hesitant about putting this slide in because it feels like we've been talking about the inadequacies of the biomass cooking response for quite a long time now. And as we got into the program, we realized that for reasons we don't really understand, this establishment of a biomass-focused cooking sector barely mentioned electricity at all. So while we got into this through the ideas of solar PV and energy storage, we quickly realized that while international organizations were saying that they were neutral on fuels, they were barely discussing electricity in the context of cooking. And these, you know, it's not an exaggerated story. These reports, if you search for the word electricity in any one of them, you'll find maybe two times electric pops up, and most of those are in the context of households have electric connections. There's no real discussion about the possibilities of cooking with electricity. And you may say, well, hang on, but we've had 2 years worth of the MECS program. Hasn't that changed? Look at the ESMAP, Uganda Clean Cooking Behavior Diagnostic. It still doesn't mention electric. So there, at a national level and an international level, the discussion about cooking did not include electricity. In the meantime, actually, the energy access sector, if there is such a thing, which I tend to put energy access in brackets electricity, has really gone forward. So there's a massive increasing percentage of the world who are now connected to electricity. Yes, there's still a shortfall of 800 million, and 800 million is a huge sum. And yes, we haven't talked yet about quality of supply, etc. But there's progression from 1.2 billion down to 800 million, and over the last sort of 10 years. And that is set to continue into the future as renewables get cheaper, as generating capacity gets stronger, as there is continued investment in this area. And yet, in the same way that within the cooking sector, there's very little discussion of electricity, in the electric sector, there's very little discussion of cooking. So on the slide, I've put an illustration from a 2017 report of IEA, and you see that it lists all the possible uses of cooking, of electricity, but it talks about large appliances. It doesn't actually mention cooking. And in contrast, you know, we in the UK, we in developed economies, of course we cook with electricity. In the UK, it's about 50-50 with gas. But although the UK government has now announced that no new build houses will have gas supplies, and in places like Sweden, it's about 95%. So cooking with electricity is possible. Question is it affordable? Is it realistic in the context and situations of lower income countries? So as we've moved forward and as we've realized that there is this disconnect between the cooking sector ignoring that fuel of electricity and the electric sector ignoring that load profile of cooking, we've increasingly just discussed about, well, how do we get that conversation in the same room? There was a little video made fairly early on, and some of you who were at last year's annual conference would have seen that video, and I've taken snapshots, put it on the slide here. It's about that chasm between the cooking sector and the electric sector. And increasingly, we are having the headline that energy access, household energy access, should be a single strategy with a single investment. If I can just go off on investment, you know, the Clean Cooking Alliance reports that 40 million has been spent on the cooking sector each year annually for the last 4 or 5 years. Contrast that with 26 billion that was spent in sub-Saharan Africa on electricity generation, both fossil fuel generation and renewables, and transmission, increasing transmission. 32 billion in Southeast Asia, 50 billion in India. You know, and India and China are still the location of a lot of these biomass users. Oh, I got a fly. It reminds me of the Mike Pence fly in the presidential debate. Right. That was a distraction, but this is meant to be slightly informal, so I'm going to carry on. This contrast between electricity and cooking, I find it encapsulated in Kampala. Kampala is 1.5, 1.6 million people, and is set to double in size over the next 15 to 20 years by inward migration and by population growth. 95% of all households have a grid connection. Uganda has made tremendous gains, going from 2005 when there were massive shortages through to now. It's tripled its capacity, and I have to confess I'm not clear whether the Karuma Dam is online yet or not, but when it is, there will be a surplus of electricity. Excuse me, it's not COVID. A surplus of electricity with a need for greater demand. And yet 70% of households in Kampala are still cooking with charcoal, with all the respiratory problems, which I am demonstrating now, with all the respiratory problems that are associated with that. So we have shown over the last year, the Creek team in Uganda have shown that you can cook traditional Ugandan food in electric pressure cookers, and it's an acceptable taste. And indeed, Uganda has already changed, or at least suggested a change. It's in the draft energy policy that came out in October 2019, that they focus on electric and energy efficient appliances. So we don't want to waste all this energy that's being created. Wastage represents expenditure for the household. And so, you know, what the Crete team have shown is that if you use a hot plate for these traditional Ugandan meals, then the cost of doing that is about the same as LPG. Charcoal is relatively cheaper in Kampala than it is in, say, Nairobi. And so actually with a hot plate, charcoal is slightly cheaper. However, when you come to an EPC, which can do long, heavy foods with a significant efficiency, then the cost of cooking that meal on electricity is cheaper than charcoal, LPG. It's less than, you know, it's about 1/3 of the cost for a lot of the meals that LPG is. It's going to make me stress as to whether I should keep all these coughing in and keep it informal or go for some formality. We're all used to Zooms where people are having to cough and accidentally stand up and reveal that they're wearing shorts. So we can, you know, the urban situation in Kampala is a classic example. Umeme is a profit-making utility that is getting its act together, that's got a good solid base. Um, Loss of electricity is rare in Kampala now, and so why not shift this? You know, yeah. So we do get some pushback from people saying, well, hang on, urban areas, what about all the rural areas? Aren't you leaving people behind? That's not our intention. Our intention is to start with the urban areas, which are actually a neglected area. When ESMAP commissioned a systematic review, one of its few headlines was that they couldn't find any urban studies on cooking in low and middle income countries that fitted the criteria. So there's not only been a focus on biomass, but there's been a neglect on urban and peri-urban centres. So again, cities are growing, and most of them are set to double in the next 2 decades by inward migration and by population growth. So there is a strong need to address them. When I was doing my agriculture degree, which is many years ago now, you know, Africa was predominantly rural, but that has changed and is changing quite rapidly. Someone like the Kampala municipality, they're really worried about how they will get the infrastructure for an increasing population. And if we can reduce the charcoal and reduce the air pollution, then perhaps over the next 15, 20 years, when that matches the coming in of electric cars or clean transport, maybe cities will be very different than what they are now. Some people also suggest that we're dreaming. Well, yes, we are dreaming. We want to see the world change. We want to see that climate-friendly, climate of energy. Black carbon is an important element of the climate change equation, and charcoal users are using a lot of wood, whereas a rural household using wood uses about half a ton a year as a rule of thumb. Charcoal users, by the time it's processed and then used, are using about 1 ton. So if we actually only addressed half the population, but that half of population pivoted away from charcoal to clean energy, you'd actually be saving, I don't know, something like 2/3 wood fuel combustion of the country. So our focus on urban is because A, it's been neglected, B, they are connected, and C, it still addresses the deforestation, the gender aspects, and in fact many of the urban poor are more vulnerable than their rural cousins because they have so few resources, they have little social capital, and there is a huge opportunity here.
Welcome to Shamba Shape Up. Once again, we have traveled all over East Africa to find hard-working farmers.
We want to celebrate them while giving them the knowledge they need,
so they can adapt and make their farms more productive even while the climate changes.
I'm very hungry. I'm quite good.
Nemo, thank you very much for joining us. I had to call you because now we've been here at Paris's Shamba, working very hard. It's lunchtime. I'm feeling hungry. I came to the kitchen and I found you are making matumbo, but it was not ready.
Yes,
and I'm still hungry. So I remembered that Nemo can give us a solution to cooking faster and safer and cheaper.
Yes.
And here you are. Now let me start with you, Paris. How long does it take you to cook matumbo?
2 hours. Boiling and frying.
That's a lot of time that you can spend doing so much, isn't
Yes.
it, Nemo?
Yes, 2 hours is a very long time. I've come with a pressure cooker to help you reduce that time so that you can feed your family on time.
You said when you're cooking matumbo, you are spending almost 2 hours.
Yes.
What normally do you use when you're cooking food like matumbo?
Charcoal.
Charcoal.
Yes.
And how much is one tin?
1 tin is 150.
Paris uses 2 tins of charcoal that cost her 300 shillings.
And now she's going to spend how much time cooking matumbo?
It takes roughly between 30 minutes and 40 minutes. Yes, depending on how tender you want your matumbo to be.
The matumbo will be ready with 30 minutes.
And at what cost?
So the cost, it will depend with the amount of time that you use, and it will average between 8 shillings and 12 shillings.
You can see how much money you'll be saving.
Thank you very much.
Uh-huh.
So let's put in the onions. Add some oil. Then garlic and ginger. Let's put in our tomato. Some seasoning, add some salt. And finally, the matumbo. Add some water, stir, and then cover. Cancel the saute program and set the pressure cooker to cook the matumbo, and that's it. You can even go and do other chores as you wait for it to cook.
So, is our food ready?
Yes, it is.
How long did it take?
It took 40 minutes to cook the matumbo to tenderness, and it cost us 6 shillings and 94 cents.
Wow.
Paris uses 300 shillings on charcoal and takes 2 hours to make matumbo using a charcoal burner. But with a pressure cooker, she's used 6 shillings and 94 cents and took 40 minutes to cook the same matumbo.
What do you think of that, Paris?
I think it's perfect. It's very efficient.
So now, servers, let's have a taste and see. Mmm.
Yes.
Ah,
There is our matumbo.
nice aroma.
Very tender and very sweet.
This is what I was looking forward to. And I think mission accomplished.
Yes.
Thank you.
Daniel was impressed by how efficient and cost-effective the electric pressure cooker was.
So how is MECS going to get to this transition? Well, we're in partnerships at many different levels. One of our key partners is ESMAP of the World Bank. ESMAP have a long tradition in energy access, and they tackle both cooking and electrification, and they influence the rest of the World Bank. One of the things that one of the publications that they recently launched is the state of access to modern energy cooking. That was recently launched, and that's an analysis of national data to see where we are, and also to calculate some scenarios that might get us closer to SDG 7 by 2030. Their ideal scenario requires $150 billion a year, but although that sounds a huge amount, of that, about 100 billion is consumer finance that pivots from biomass expenditure to modern energy expenditure, and of course that is a potential revenue for the utilities. So that 100 billion that they calculate is actually quite attractive for this whole proposition of make a single investment in electrification and then you've got the revenue coming in. The second report that is launched as part of this week actually is going to be Cooking with Electricity, a Cost Perspective. Again, an ESMAP report, although it builds on the work of John Leary, Matt Leach, a little bit myself as authors, but building on work done by a lot of the team across the whole of MECS. That shows that electricity is cheaper to cook with than other fuels in some scenarios, in some contexts, and uses empirical data for that. And modeling to extend it, what it might look like into the future. That should be a great advocacy and influencing document, and it should be able to go to the electrification lending part of the development finance institutions and be able to build them, get them to consider cooking if they can see that it's a cost-effective proposition. I mean, just 2 days ago, I was talking to someone who works with the World Bank all the time, and they were telling me that they actually had a conversation with the in a particular country who was doing a 350 million expansion of the grid, extending the access. And when he started talking about cooking and saying, are you allowing for cooking load profiles? The officer turned around and said, no, that's not within my remit. These are the people that we have to try and capture, so that we're not just isolating 10 million in order to do a bespoke cooking program, but actually we're getting utilities, ministries of energy, energy regulation authorities to consider how cooking is embedded into the electrification. Finally, on ESMAP, they are continuing to use their multi-tier framework to analyze and monitor progress and to give us insights into country. The multi-tier framework looks at the quality of electricity, and it looks at the quality of the cooking experience. And in that sense, it's a great step forward. It's been really brilliant, because previously national data was a single question on what is your primary cooking fuel. And so if somebody was cooking 60% of the time with LPG and stacking it with 40% of charcoal, the answer was LPG. And so the statistics were skewed because they were still getting health problems. Yeah. No, that wasn't a staged cough, just because I'm talking about health problems again. It's a coincidence. So still getting health problems from, say, the charcoal or the stacked fuel, but it wasn't being reflected in the data. The multi-tier framework is great because it asks questions like whether you've got a window and whether you're cooking inside or outside. You know, with urban cooking, you know, people are shut in very small confined housing. With rural, actually you could cook outside some of the time, and if you've got a decent wind blowing the smoke away, we all have sat around barbecues and know the difference. So the multi-tier framework has modules on electricity and modules on cooking. Again, because of the divide I keep talking about, those two modules barely touch each other. And one of the things we've been doing is reanalyzing some of the MTF data to try and make that connection, to find out whether people have electrical appliances, rice cookers, kettles, and what that does to influence their cooking. So as part of the program, we have to engage at high level policy. We are, of course, generating at the field level, but high level policy influencing is an important thing to us. You can probably recognize that it was Ed who wrote this particular slide. Let me just try and read it. For this new narrative to gain the ascendancy within the global community will require considerable effort in galvanizing political support and building momentum. Sorry, I felt it was a bit like Tricky Dicky at that point. But it's really important that we engage at a high level policy environment. It's not enough to just produce research. We are actually seeking to change the narrative globally, and therefore it's really important that we engage with SE for All. Ed is part of this high level political platform that was convened by WHO and Kanda Keller. And we have also had interactions with parliamentarians through the Climate Parliament. So I believe that we're moving forward in terms of high-level policy influence. So that's at the sort of policy, political level, but we are also looking at supply chains and getting these devices into the country. And to do that, we've picked up on these commercially available electric pressure cookers. You can buy them in your local shop. If you're in the UK, you can get them off Amazon. And we have been looking to how can we encourage them into sub-Saharan Africa to be more available on the shops. When we started, they were not available at all, but now they're beginning to, and certainly in Kenya, there's been some fantastic movement forward in terms of Kenya Power actually promoting them. We've had Shamba Chef who are actually telling people about them, and that has stimulated people to actually ask, well, where can I buy one? So it's all about getting the supply chains in place. We've been talking to the Chinese factories to make sure that we're getting the the high quality ones at the cheapest possible price. And indeed, there has been a sort of Which magazine assessment of safety features and usability through an organization called CLASP. And all the time we're aware of the cultural sensitivities of cooking food. And so we're trying to get our southern partners to actually cook with these devices and to make sure that they can actually do things like matoke, the famous Ugandan meal that you have to wrap in banana leaves and yeah. So it's important to for us. We have found an energy efficient device which seems to fulfill a lot of people's cooking needs, and that's great. But we're also stimulating innovation. And those devices are for strong AC grids that and so the power levels are relatively high at a kilowatt plus. And so there's possibilities about lower power devices. We still have that energy storage in mind, and we're doing some research, action research on the energy storage. I mean, energy storage is an interesting one. The price per lithium battery that was predicted to be in 2020 at 2015, when some of the pre-MECS research was being done, the price now in 2020 is lower than that prediction, and the curve is actually lower than we thought it would be at that point. So it's becoming more and more of a reality. There are power hubs. Crest has been designing power hubs, but actually there are now power hubs on commercial sites such as Amazon and Alibaba, and they hold a very interesting future. You know, to if we show the role of energy storage, they'll be able to take that forward. But there's also some real innovations in terms of thermal storage, so phase change material, locally made equipment, and of course there's innovations in LPG and ethanol and all sorts of things. And none of those innovations and none of the companies that we're talking to will be able to go forward without the finance. People are aware of the upfront cost for the household, which may be a challenge, and they are also aware of the profitability for the companies that may be slightly long term. And so it's about enabling finance at these various levels. As I said, the ESMAP have introduced a fund which is co-benefits results-based finance. We're also working with NDEV on results-based finance of EPCs in Kenya, looking at to work with Norway in Zambia on results-based financing. But then there's also we've been working with Cardano and Climate Care to use carbon funding to mitigate the cost of appliances. So we're looking all the time for early patient capital. So we've invested in Acumen. We've investing about $2 in Spark Plus, which is hosted by CCA, but has an injection of capital from the African Development Bank. And we've commissioned studies on the best way to enable the finance. I mean, the exciting one for me is the crowdfunding, and we're not there yet, but I can really see how something like toilet twinning, which worked quite well with the UK, we could actually start looking at our electrical appliances in our own kitchens and do some twinning there, or just getting crowdfunding that might overcome. So there's traditional finance, the development finance institutions, and there we're exploring alternative types of finance. I keep talking about electrical, and I throw in every now and then the LPG. Well, it's important to know that LPG is likely to be useful as a transition fuel. I do reiterate that for me, and I speak personally, not for the whole team, but for me, a single investment strategy, you've put in your generator, you're running your wires to the household. You now only have to stimulate that household to get an electrical appliance, and they can be cooking. Whereas as soon as you do LPG, you've got to have a port that imports the LPG. You've then got to have distributors people have got to redo their bottle. LPG is more fun to cook with, I'll give you that. But you know, I mean, in many places, the costs, India, Ecuador, Indonesia, LPG has had to be subsidized. And that means that the governments are paying out quite a lot. But again, I'm often accused of being too down on LPG and too much electricity. I fully acknowledge that I'm not fuel neutral, like many of my colleagues. I see it as about investment, and you're trying to stimulate investment in a fossil fuel as opposed to utilizing the increasing investment in renewables. Having said that, we have invested in a study on bio-LPG, and bio-LPG holds some fantastic promise, and we're already attracting some investors, having just done an initial study alongside the University of Liverpool, Surrey, and GLPGP. And also, interestingly, the Cooking with Electricity report I mentioned earlier by ESMAP, actually a clean stack of LPG and EPC is really good, because LPG is good for flash frying, for your stir fry, etc., whereas an EPC is really good for your long-term boiling of beans. So actually bringing those two together will be quite interesting. What about cooking outside of homes? Well, the more observant of you will have noticed these two pressure cookers in the background. That's an ordinary one, and that is a 33-litre one. It's commercially available, and we're exploring that as to whether that could be used for school meals, institutional meals. Excuse me. We want to displace the wood, which is causing respiratory diseases. I've used that joke before, so now I'm into dad joking. Yes, we are exploring that. We're working with the World Food Programme, who have the beginnings of a 10-year strategy to help many schools transition from biomass to modern energy cooking. We've developed a curriculum with UNITAR for teaching to UNHCR staff for use in humanitarian situations. And each of these institutions, humanitarians, and something that we're calling modern eating habits, all have landscape documents that have been produced during the year and are available for consultation. Modern eating is actually acknowledging that people's habits are changing. So actually, people are coming home from work and buying their food from street vendors already hot. So it's a question of, do those street vendors pivot to modern energy cooking? How much can urban workers, how much are they actually substituting? We found that in one of the Nairobi studies, 25% of meals were reheated. Now that means either reheated because it was yesterday's leftovers, or reheated because they bought a ready meal on the street. Now that's not a robust data point. It was too small a sample, but over the coming year we will seek to identify that and see if there are ways of engaging with the broader food industry in order to save cooking energy and enhance the whole capability of people to transition from biomass to modern energy cooking. So 2020 has, of course, been marked by COVID, and it has slowed things down. We have kept working, but there aren't as many field studies as perhaps we would have liked. We've had endless Skype calls, Zoom calls, as I expect many of you have. There is a working paper that was drawn together in, I think, March or April. It still hasn't been spell corrected and sorted out, and we are thinking of publishing it as a properly sorted out publication. But it picked up on this idea that people are talking about building back better, and what we're suggesting is that COVID recovery funds could be used to unlock modern energy cooking, which would in turn unlock the health, because COVID kills by comorbidity. and you've got non-communicable diseases. It would unlock some of the environment and this movement towards climate carbon zero. And it would also release time for women. One of the things that really struck me when I was working with Tanzanian women was how much they appreciated the being able to switch on the EPC and then walk away, do something else, and then come back to it. And the other thing they say a lot is cleanliness. They love the idea that they can start with a clean clothing, and by the time they finish the meal, they are still with clean clothing. They haven't been bending over a hot stove and sweating and getting charcoal dust on them or whatever. Anyway, the working paper, cooking, health, energy, environment, and gender, was presented by the Kenyan government to the UN summit, and there is a video was made for that occasion to summarize it. So where do we go for year 3? Well, we seem to be in a good position. I, of course, am impatient that we're not further along, but I think you know, a lot of the action research is a little incomplete. We had challenges in contracting people, so that delayed things. Then we got hit by COVID, so you know, okay, I would like it further on, but basically we are in a good position. We've made reasonable gains in getting the cooking sector to consider electricity, but I think we have a long way to go to get those who are working in electricity to consider cooking. But let's acknowledge that we're dealing with a complex system, and we are seeking a significant change, as well as documenting action research. So we're very pleased that we got an A+ for our year 2, and we hope to get that for year 3. Year 3 will be about scaling, actually trying to take some of these ideas further up scale. And so 2021, you know, we've got some advantages. We've got the fact that the electricity demand has dropped, and so many utilities are currently looking for other ways to actually use more electricity. I haven't said, but you know, there's so much research I could have said, and I hope it comes up in other places. Mini grids, often not profitable, often need households to use more electricity than they do, and you know, the cooking is a possibility there. So we have some solid action research building on a growing evidence base, and the world is talking about building back better. It's talking about more green, more renewables, and the renewables are continuing to drop in price. Some of the price points of large-scale solar concentrators is just amazing, 2 or 3 cents per kilowatt hour. So and Ethiopia has put one of those in recently. So don't fall into the trap of looking behind and thinking that all of this is too challenging with bad electrical grid networks. Electrical grid networks dramatically and rapidly. I'm going to leave it there. I've spoken for far too long. My machine is telling me that it's 35 minutes and it was supposed to be 20 minutes max. Okay, but we're doing well. Let's carry on, push on. Thank you, Me. Thank you, Me, for speaking. Okay, I don't see any questions on the chat function. Does anybody have some questions? Joni, can I just check that you can still hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, Simon.
Okay. So Bimbai has asked, what criteria did you have in mind for the development of EPCs, and how do they meet the needs of each priority country. So I guess our key criteria was that it would be able to cook the meals that are culturally acceptable so the meals are culturally acceptable, but also the resulting taste and flavor would be culturally acceptable. That's actually the bottom line. And then we look at affordability, and then we look at the access and availability. Any other questions, or do you want a supplement to that question? Can you expand a bit more about how year 3 will be scaling up? What does this mean for countries which are towards the earlier stages of, I can't read it, hang on, earlier stages of their MECS journey? You can unmute and ask these questions directly, you know. We were only saying chat functions during the actual presentation. But anyway, Will, scaling up, is Ed on the call yet? Ed Brown, are you there? Ah, he's not. Malcolm is, basically there's a lot of work on the finance side of things, which will mean various results-based financing and various patient capital for people to actually implement these things. So when we talk about scaling up, we're really trying to persuade the development finance institutions to really invest in this. That obviously they have you have the double track record of the biomass momentum, if I can put it that way, but also this whole idea that electricity is not strong enough, LPG is still a fossil fuel. I think there are all sorts of possibilities in taking that forward. So for us, scaling up during year 3 means having those strong discussions with development finance institutions in all their shapes and forms, including sort of the Acumens and the Spark Pluses and whatever. However, your question was also, what does this mean for countries which are towards the earliest stages of the MECS journey? I mean, that was the context of my comment about it took us a while to contract people. And so Uganda, for instance, the CREEP team have recently done some publishing of their tests in a stakeholder meeting, but the key players like UMEMI, the utility, and the Ministry of Energy are still wanting slightly more evidence that people will continue to use these electrical appliances and will use them for most of their cooking. And so, yeah, in terms of scaling, it is a big question about generating enough evidence to convince the policymakers to then enact policies that will set up the situation. Oh, there's a flurry of questions, so let's have a look. What was the most surprising unintended consequence of 2020? John Leary, I'm going to hand that question over to you because I speak too much.
Mr. Gorgon, I'm listening. I'm not sure I have an answer for that yet. Can I think about it and come back to that one?
All right, we'll come back to that one. Richard says, why do you think it will be harder next year to get a high grade from FCDO for the annual report? Okay, well, very simply, so A is that you actually did what you said you would do. So we set milestones in the log frame, and you get a B. If you promise 20 milestones and you deliver 19 of them, you get a B. And if you promise 20 milestones and you do 19 of the ones that you talked about and 20 complete the other ones, you get a B, because everything is about fulfilling the milestones that you promised to fulfill. You get an A plus if you if you do the promise of 20, get the 20, and then exceed. So A plus is mildly exceeded the milestones, and A plus plus, which is strongly exceeded the milestones. It'd be great to get an A plus plus, but it's pretty rare. Why do I think it's difficult this year? Because we are still COVIDing, and travel is pretty restricted. We are allowed to change milestones in the log frame, but we've had that discussion with FCDO, and if anything, because we got an A plus last year, they're pushing us to be ambitious for year 3 and 4 and 5. And so having pushed the target slightly higher, it will then be, I think, quite difficult to exceed them in a COVID world. But you've got to admit, 2020 was pretty weird, and we don't really know what 2021 is going to look like. So yeah, okay, I'm looking at questions. John, you got an answer yet?
Yeah, I guess I would say that probably the most surprising unintended consequence of 2020 has been that there is actually another opportunity for us to create synergistic outcomes from the MECS program as a whole, tying into what you've been saying about being able to build back better from COVID. This is just yet another opportunity where we see another global development challenge, where what we're doing in terms of trying to encourage people to transition towards modern energy for cooking, we can also help policymakers around the world to meet their goals of building their nations back better.
Karen asks, we know that to get the health impacts, we need a complete transition to modern fuels. Is MECS considering how to accelerate a full transition to electricity, or a combination of electricity and LPG? Probably not the best person to answer that. I am very fixated on this. People have spent so much money on electricity. I can't get my head round why would you not consider adding a little bit more money to enable people to get electrical appliances. But having said that, we do have colleagues within our program who are seem quite fixed on LPG, and it is the case that LPG has a bit more of a track record already. And I think this bio LPG is quite exciting, but again, it's sort of, 5-10 years down the line. So are we considering how to accelerate a full transition? I think, we always keep it in mind. It's always our hope and aspiration, and it probably will be a combination of electricity, LPG, and indeed ethanol, and other clean fuels. Again, with electricity, we probably should split it up into the commercial AC versions and the off-grid versions. And in those off-grid versions, I would include the work of Cal Poly, who are looking at relatively homemade electrical appliances that use phase change material to time shift the energy from the solar PV to enable evening cooking. Those could all be taken forward and are coming in at interesting price points. So, we aspire. I don't think it is electricity or LPG. It is modern energy cooking services. That's what we're looking for. We added services to the name of the program because we want to explore other business models. And I think those business models are still evolving quite considerably. We're seeing here in developed economies transition between owning a car and potentially renting a car. They were talking about renting the batteries and then upgrading them as battery technology improves. Those sort of service contract, we've got used to it on our phone. those delivery models could equally leapfrog and enable people who cannot afford the capex up front to sign up for a service proposition. John, you're asking what are the key aims of year 4 and 5? How does this differ from year 3? Well, that's a good question. It is about scaling, and it's a question of you know, how far can we get within our time frame. Yeah, I'm going to leave it at that. Anybody else want to jump in and answer that question? Matt Leach, where do you see years 4 and 5?
Where do I see years 4 and 5? Blimey, you really do like passing on the tricky questions, don't you?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, so I've just posted a question on the chat actually, which is actually about a different form of gas for cooking, which I think plays into the discussion of the whole clean fuel stack and whether it all has to be about electricity. I mean, I am a big believer in electricity for cooking, and I'm not going against that at all. But I think years 4 and 5 will see us actually expanding our horizons a little bit into a bunch of other approaches to clean energy and clean fuels for cooking, because I think there's a lot of technology out there which is already really well known for taking perhaps residual biomass and turning it into useful fuels. And the technology is not, you know, there's no rocket science involved. We know about it. It's about how you implement and organize people and find business models that make this stuff work to get it to users. And I think there's a lot of work and research that can go on into how to put business models in place to join things up across sectors. You know, we've been talking about it for years that, you know, there's all this great biomass out there and residual materials. Why can't we turn that into useful energy for use in households and others? And it seems like one of those kind of forgotten options, really. And I think it's not about technology anymore. It's about how we organize ourselves to do it and get the funding in place. Anyway, so that's just one particular thread. I think we'll expand out our range of options and be looking at how we integrate those things together.
And I think to build on that, you know, Matt has framed it as expand out our options. In a sense, we narrowed down our options in order to get a message across. We were commissioned to create an alternative strategy and to get the world talking about something other than improved biomass cook stoves. Yeah, I think many on the call know me, so I exaggerate to get a point across, but actually there's a lot going on in the wake of that exaggeration that is more nuanced and is a contribution to a complex system. I mean, I keep coming back to this. You know, I've worked in development enough to know that you can't control how life moves forward. You can just make contributions to it, and I love the monitoring and evaluation system called outcome mapping, because outcome mapping talks about contribution, not attribution. And we will make our little contributions. Some of us think this is a big program. It's relatively small in the global scheme of things. Chris, you asked, you mentioned that programs looking to bring together work on access to cooking and access to electricity. Can you expand on that? Is this more than the demand modeling work? Yeah, it's about lobbying a different set of stakeholders. The modeling is really important, and it's great that you know, we've got Bartek's network paper, etc. But you know, there are discussions at various levels, and various people don't sit in the same room as each other. And so part of year 3 will be trying to have conversations with other groups, IEA through the Morocco connection, UNSC for all. Yeah, there are a number of people. At the moment, we've tended to talk to the cooking sector, and I think we now need to more consciously talk to the wider energy access sector. Jane does an advert for Cal Poly on 24th Tuesday. Yes, please. I recommend you sign up for that. Marin's asking, after 2 years, what the issues you consider the program's known unknowns. Things aware of but don't yet understand. Oh, and Nigel's just thrown in that he's talking about Bartek's paper on Thursday session on the modelling. Coming back to Merrin's questions, known unknowns. I think we still don't have the we don't have enough evidence, action research on how people will respond over the longer term, whether they revert to some dirty stacking. We don't know things like the durability of some of the electrical appliances, and weirdly, we still don't know how much people spend on cooking. Much of the data that comes in is confused. Particularly when you get to peri-urban and dense rural areas, the amount of money people are actually spending, cash spending on wood and charcoal. When you get to the very low dense rural areas, there is a there's a collection of wood. There's a drudgery for women, which we would like to address, but in order to address that, we have to convince the community. No, not convince. It's not us convincing them. We have to work with them so that they can see that it is worth investing in cash, selling a goat or something to alleviate the drudgery of members of their community. When you get to urban areas, it's much clearer, because urban is about purchasing kerosene, charcoal, LPG. There's a monetary economy around the cooking. Peri-urban and dense rural, that is all mixed together. Some people are collecting, some people are purchasing, and that picture, that context remains for me unclear. I'm aware that we are reaching 5 minutes from the end. So I've done Marin's question. Matt does his advert for bio-LPG and bio-CNG. It's of course possible to use biomass to generate electricity. And I mean, I should point out, those of you who haven't read the bio-LPG report, they focus in on municipal waste, which I really like, because well, Simon from Ghana is on the call, and he will know from our SAMSET project how much municipal waste is an issue for municipalities, and if we can convert that to either electricity or to bio-LPG, that'd be great. And final question then is from Bridget. What is MEC's strategy for collaborating with other development partners with a biomass focus? How do we ensure our efforts are sustained after MECS? Those are two slightly different questions. How do we ensure our efforts are sustained after MECS is by intriguing and inviting ministries of energy, utilities, and others who are engaged in energy access to involve cooking in their thinking and in their calculating of load profiles and their strategies. How do we engage with those who are working on biomass? I don't know the answer to that. Yeah, that's not a good place to end the question and answer, but I really don't know. I'm imagining, Bridget, that you're imagining the small improved cook stove producer. I mean, I think the bigger agencies like CCA and ECCH of ESMAP, yeah, they are looking to remain somehow fuel agnostic but to still work with briquettes and to take things forward with tier 4 improved cook stoves. And indeed, ESMAP themselves are still wanting to transition people from tier 2 to tier 3, arguing that it's part of their transition scenario. So they had two scenarios, one which was an ideal that we got to 2030 with complete modern energy cooking, and that was 150 billion a year for the next 10 years. But they had a second scenario, which was using improved cook stoves to take from tier 2 to tier 3, and then once everybody gets used to tier 3 to tier 4 and tier 5. As a program, FCDO has asked us not to deal with biomass, and so whilst we can acknowledge sorry, I was just reading Ed's intervention about, yeah, I'm waffling, but I don't know how to answer the first half of your question, Bridget. Ed, do you want to come in and just sign off the whole session? Have I got my time wrong? Hang on, what is the time?
I think you've got another 25 minutes yet if you want it, haven't you?
Yeah,
yes, the session
I
goes on till
sorry.
11:30.
I was looking at the recording timer, which says 1 hour 31. So how has that been possible? Because we started at 10 o'clock.
I think the recording timer often starts when the first person comes into the meeting. So if someone was super early setting up, it would have started then.
Oh, okay. All right, then I'm way ahead of my time. I've got 25 minutes left. Right, yep. So let's welcome Ed, and he can make his contribution.
I was just saying in response to what you were just saying, Simon, that one of the areas where I think there is a good connection to at least one of the key stakeholders in the traditional clean cooking arena is via those last mile distributors. So I've already had a few of those types of organisations contact us because they're interested in tier LPG particularly. So I mean, we're already working with some organisations that are stocking those kinds of devices. And the Practical Action Run program, the Global Distributors Collective, have already reached out to us now, I think on 4 occasions, with different country partners who are interested in what we're doing. So I think that's one of the interesting points of connection. Unfortunately, I for a whole variety of reasons, missed most of what you presented today, Simon. I'll update you on that later. But that was just picking up at the end of it. That was just something I thought might be useful to stress.
Thank you. Okay, I can see that Nigel and John are having a conversation about how long is this session, but let's go for until 11:30. Apologise that I was getting confused. Right, in which case, can I ask for and stimulate more questions? And/or Bridget, do you want to come back in on your question?
Yes, Simon. So what I was thinking about was the traditional development agencies in the cooking space have developed very good connections with a lot of government agencies and yeah, a lot of government agencies like SMV in Ghana, for example, have very strong links in government and with other ministries. So I was just wondering how we could collaborate with them, not take on their biomass agenda, but leverage on the networks and connections that they have already built over the years to promote modern energy cooking. So that was my thinking.
Yeah, I think No, thank you, Bridget. I think there are two sets of stakeholders that we have not really sufficiently engaged with during years 1 and 2 and are on the horizon for year 3. One is actually, you talked about SMV that did actually do cooking, but was close to the community, engaging with the community. And certainly Caritas have engaged with Pasito and are doing the cooking side of things. But there are many NGOs that are engaged with community development and just, it's a pejorative word and I don't mean it like this, but they dabble with cooking. Cooking is just one of a whole range of things that, you know, improved buffalo for ploughing and all sorts of things. And we need to, it would be good to get our learnings and our messages to some of those organizations. So whatever you might think of the World Visions and the Tier Funds, you know, they do engage with the community. They're through the faith communities and there's opportunity there. There's also Mercy Corps and some of these large organizations that have community connections, and I don't think we have consciously shared our learnings with them yet, so we're going to contact Bond and see what we can do there, and in each of the countries encourage our southern partners to do a bit more of a reach out to NGO stakeholders. The second group of stakeholders that we have not effectively engaged with yet are the philanthropists. So we tried Gates Foundation 2-3 years ago, and they were busy on other stuff. And even though Melinda Gates were, you know, published stuff about the drudgery of women and whatever, they were not ready yet to engage in this area. But now we have a lot more evidence and a lot more action research data that we can share with them. And so the Rockefeller has always been a strong supporter of CCA and other stuff. But, you know, the Gates, the philanthropists, it'd be worth trying to engage with them. Can you tell us more about the, sorry, was that somebody coming in on another question? Okay, I'm going to go for, can you tell us more about the electric pressure cauldron in your background? Where did it come from? Where's it going? It just came from a factory in China that Anne, didn't you send me the first connection and said, I've just seen these on Alibaba? Somebody sent a connection.
Yes,
and,
yeah. Simon, we wanted you to buy the biggest thing you could find.
Yes, so we actually bought a 65
liters.
65 litre one.
And
the one behind me is only 33 litres. I have tested the one behind, and it just does what it says on the tin. It heats things up, gets the pressure, switches it off, and behaves exactly like the smaller one. The reason I haven't done the 65 one is I don't have a, it's a 5 kilowatt beast, and I don't have a strong enough electrical system at home. I'm going to have to get an electrician to come in and actually create me a plug. So what else can I tell you? Where's it going? So that particular one, don't know, but there are various discussions with Anne. Anne can come in and tell people if she wants, or but also, you know, Kenya has expressed some interest to actually get a couple of these, and just Uganda as well, to try them out with our southern partners. Yeah, it's just a question of sorting out the budget and then hitting buy on Alibaba. And in fact, what's nice is that whereas we had the one original factory, I also have another one over there, which is a 40 litre cauldron. I quite like the word electric pressure cauldron, which is from a different factory. And when you go on Alibaba and you start inquiring about any particular product, I'm not quite sure how it works for the Chinese factories, but they hear about that you're interested in that product. So this was literally somebody popping up on the chat saying, we got a 40 litre, do you want one of them? And I went, yeah, all right. So I have the 3 cauldrons at the moment, and as I say, the first one just behaves exactly as you would expect it to. There was a mildly amusing unboxing video which was circulating, if nobody saw that, do. And then Vimbai and I have some plans to cook a substantial meal within the cauldrons and video it so that we can attract Southern partners and stakeholders. And you're still unmuted and you look like you want to say something.
Thanks, Simon. I'd just like to add that I think one of the key strategies of MECS is actually to work with partners such as World Food Programme to actually convert their programs to modern energy cooking. So we have great interest from them to look at very large size electric devices for their schools. And it's amazing that they've been the key proponents. Rafael Balianco was talking about electric cooking for 20 years, and all of a sudden, I think because of MECS, people coming to her and go, have you just considered electric cooking? And she's going, well, welcome to the table. So it's really nice to see that narrative change through other organizations' eyes. So fantastic work.
Thank you. I think that's an important thing which we haven't said explicitly yet, is the timing is right. You know, if we were talking about this 15, 20 years ago, yeah, Uganda was load shedding, didn't have the generating capacity. Johannes has asked a question which I haven't read yet, but it reminds me to say, you know, Kenya was load shedding. I remember working in Thika, and you know, we were getting voltage drops down to 180 on what was supposedly, you know, 220, 240. So it is a moment, and if you look at the IEA reports that came out the last few weeks, you see that they are talking that renewables have really reached a price point where they're really strong. And what COVID has done is it has reduced the demand, but most of that reduction of demand is on the fossil fuel side, because actually they're the flexible ones who can switch off. The renewables just carry on generating, and so a greater proportion of the world's energy is currently renewable. But then when they look forward to the recovery, they think that fossil fuels might get back to where they were in terms of generating capacity, but they think that renewables will still carry on growing beyond where they are now. So they talk about a decade, and IRENA talks about a decade of renewables and a decade of strengthening the electrical grid in many of these countries. And I think the flexibility you know, of renewables does mean that that Ethiopia can buy into a solar concentrator generating station and get it done. It can start in month 1, and by month 24 it's finished. It's yeah. So again, I said in my recorded talk, you know, if we look back 15, 20 years ago, yes, of course, as Anne said, you know, people who were talking along those lines were getting a lot of skepticism. Oh, hang on, the grid's not strong enough. But that is changing. I'm not saying it's sorted, and I don't know if Jakob is on the call, but you know, there are still significant problems with the grid electricity. And of course, when India says all villages in India are now connected, which is what they've done over the last 10 years, actually what they mean is the village is connected, but up to 10% of the households are connected. So there's still 90% of the households that are not yet connected, but the opportunity is there. And yeah, Sorry, I haven't been. Johannes said, do we have a collective MECS information system that country teams can harness to build robust evidence for stakeholder engagement, or is this something in the pipeline? And if there are plans for translations? I'm going to hand that over to, I'm going to get Will to talk about the GMA, and then ask Louise to come in on the shared drive. Will, you kick us off.
I've been itching to put an ad in the chat, so thanks, Simon. Yeah, so a lot of people are aware, but some aren't. We're redoing the global market assessment for electric cooking, and we're kind of in the key critical stages of gathering people's perspectives and trying to get as many people involved as possible. So I don't want to sort of speak about it too long, but if anybody's interested in giving their perspectives regarding which factors are really important on deciding whether electric cooking has got more or less potential in the country, then please get in touch, because we're trying to get perspectives from kind of impact people like NGOs and people are looking to make development impact, but also a different group of people that are thinking of it from a kind of investment perspective. So where it would be attractive to private sector companies or investment finance and larger institutions. So please get in touch and fill out the fuel prices survey and spread it around to all of your contacts. I'll put some links in the chat. Thank you all.
Thanks, Will. Louise, on knowledge sharing.
I'm very sorry. What was the specific question?
How does the wider MECS program share its knowledge with each other? And are there plans for knowledge translations?
So how we share it with each other is the very much hated OneDrive. I know it's a pain and I know it's difficult, but that is our best option. Obviously, there's the website, which we were promised at the beginning of October. Hopefully now that is coming next week. So brand new, much slicker, smarter website that is easier to navigate with much better functionality, particularly on searches. Translation, good question. The no plans at present, the main problem being, what do you translate into what possible languages? Of all the languages on the planet, what do you actually translate for whom? So if someone has a proposition, you're very welcome to put it forwards. It's SharePoint rather than OneDrive. Okay, to me they're the same thing. But yeah, it's all a difficult system. If you haven't got access, let me know. And then in terms of knowledge sharing more widely, other than the website and the newsletter, obviously you guys bear a lot of the responsibility as researchers and those involved in the project. Who are your audience? Who are you writing for? Who are you trying to get this information out to? When do they need it? How do they need it? So if you're going to write a 40-page working paper, how about writing a full-page, a full-point PowerPoint that can be shared more easily, a briefing note, a blog? You know, a lot of the responsibility rests with you guys producing the content. Make it accessible to those who need it. Is that enough?
Yeah, although I'm going to strengthen your last point. We actually put in the contract, in the collaboration agreement for everybody, that every time you produce a report, it's not Louise saying, how about making a PowerPoint? We actually said you should contractually write a blog to advertise it and to ensure that the exec summary is produced as a briefing paper and a okay, I think we didn't mention PowerPoint in the collaboration agreement. But yeah, please, everyone, every time you make a substantial insight through a paper, do those multiple outputs, because it's the multiple outputs that will ultimately get to the stakeholders. There may be some civil servant who has been asked by the minister to read your 40-page research, but the minister himself, when he's bored, might have a 2-pager on his desk and flick through it. Hang on, it's SharePoint I hate rather than OneDrive. On the institutional cooking, Kenya's regulatory stimulate demand. Anne is saying that Will's question, we have high. Oh, Will's question, sorry, it's off the top of my page. So, yeah, Will's question I read earlier. Institutional cooking, inspiring households to use modern energy cooking. I mean, yes, it's a complex system which will work both ways. In fact, I was talking to from Sierra Leone, and she was saying, oh, but the rural areas don't have electricity. And I was saying, yeah, but you, as a government, you probably aspire to getting them electricity. If we start with the urban area, then by the time they've got electricity, you'll be going to your auntie in the rural area saying, look, I've been using this for 2 or 3 years in the capital. Let me buy you one for Christmas or Eid or whatever. And yeah, she laughed and basically said, yes, that is how it works. The urban people will get stuff, and that will inspire the rural areas to pick it up, and that mixes in with Will's question. You know, if people are going to school and seeing that the cooking is nice and neat and clean in school, they'll come out. The kids will come home and tell their parents, and parent-teacher associations will be sharing ideas. But then also the other way around. You know, if the parents in an urban location are adopting electrical appliances, they may well turn around at a PTA and say, well, why haven't we got this for the school? There was some, hang on. Yeah, that's a discussion between John and Will. That's Will doing an advert. Johannes says this could be considered in next cooking diary plans. Yep, absolutely. Any other questions? Any other comments? Do you want to just jump in and unmute yourself and say something? Should I pick on someone? Melinda, you recently joined the program. What are your first impressions?
Hi, Simon. Thanks for that. As a recent recruit and as an anthropologist, I am impressed with the program. I do feel that more could be done in terms of studies around, and I have been vocal about that, around qualitative studies around gender disability, disability specifically, looking at how we could incorporate cooks or use, the people living with disabilities and who cook and who are often invisible in terms of our research, how we could better incorporate them. And I'm also quite interested to see what kind of data will be generated from the modern eating and cooking practices research that we're planning, and how that could be incorporated into the program next year. So I think for me, my initial impressions are a move towards bulking up a lot of the data we already have with more qualitative, ethnographic and immersive data.
So, okay, that's quite a nice note to end on. Ed is asking me, have I talked about reaching out to utilities and the difficulties thereof? Yes, so we have, and if you saw the presentation, you would know. But we'll end on this. We walk a difficult balance point between being technocentric and people-centric. I would like to shout out to John Leary, who has, has pushed us to continually make sure that we're we're finding out what real cooks, he uses this term, everyday cooks. It can be annoying in some reports, but actually it's great to ensure that we are focused on real people and what they want. And we talk about the technology, and we talk about the finance, and we talk about the high level stuff and the low level stuff. It is a very difficult jigsaw puzzle to assemble. And we want to make sure that we don't forget that there are real people with real risks and real vulnerabilities at the center of this. So we would quite like to get it right. I heard a really interesting story the other day. I was talking to an Indonesian task force, and they had brought in a chap from Ecuador who had worked in Ecuador for 15, 20, 25 years. And he was lamenting the LPG subsidy that Ecuador does on its LPG, and was trying to describe how they were trying to pivot away into electricity. And two things struck me. One was that he said that the 3 times the government had tried to remove the LPG subsidy, and 3 times the public unrest was such that it 2 out of the 3 it brought down the government, and the 3rd time the government backed down really quick. And the second thing was that when they were trying to pivot to electricity, they were saying that if people bought an induction stove, they then got 100 kilowatt hours free electricity. Their lifeline tariff was actually free for that for a month. So what was happening was that people were buying an induction stove, registering for a program to get their 100 kilowatt hours free, and then carrying on cooking with LPG and using their 100 kilowatt hours on televisions, etc. So, you know, nothing is simple. We move forward in very context-specific, complex environments. And sorry, that was a WhatsApp. I thought that was Ed putting something on the. Yeah, so it's a complex environment, and we walk that fine balance between technocentric and people-centric. We also walk a fine balance between being north-driven with all us experts suggesting things and taking things forward, and trying to encourage our southern partners to. You see, even that's slightly paternalistic, isn't it, to say and encouraging our southern partners. We want a genuine partnership between the north and the south, and we don't want the traditional donor dynamics to where we are pushing a solution on somebody, that we want that solution to grow naturally, but at the same time we have an idea of what that solution might be. And that's why I focus on a single investment, because the single investment is decided by the government of wherever. It's not for us to decide. They will be the ones that either get development finance institutions to go for it or not. And so we're all the time contributing and influencing, not dictating. Okay, time is up by 1 minute. I think we'll end it there.